Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're having a good day. I made Robin a co-host. I am proud of myself. Well, you are there. Okay. I see you now. All right. Look at that. Actually, there's one thing I didn't check. I better go back and check it. Anyway, how are you guys doing today? I sent Will a co-host invite, I think, but I
Well,
forgot to double check.
he may be busy stuffing the nest anyway. Yeah, I'm doing all right. It was a very pleasant day today in New York. It wasn't too hot for a change, so very much appreciate that, and my electric bill appreciated.
Yeah, right. It is on the verge of too hot here. How's that for an answer? It's been one of those days, and I'm grumpy.
Oh,
That's okay.
Mind your P's and Q's, folks. You don't want Prince mad at you.
It's okay. Mocker's got the brunt of it.
Mockers can take it. She can dish it out even better than you can. So.
Yeah, she can, and she was actually very, very helpful, and she is much appreciated. Everybody needs a friend like Mockers who will basically smack you upside the head when you need it and do anything else too. Anyway, let's go ahead and work on a timestamp here. I have to bring this stuff up though. All right. I think we might have lost Robin.
Nope, I'm still here. I was actually on a different screen.
The answer to that is no.
Okay, thank you.
Preferably not is what I know.
Yeah, that I was suspecting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do our timestamp.
It is currently Tuesday, July 14th in much of the world, but not all the world. So we're going to check out what time it is where. In Urbum in the UK, it is currently 1:02 a.m. And 3 days with Yenny did not help me learn to pronounce Swedish words. So I'm going with Wank in Germany. It is 2:02 a.m. in Wank, Germany today. And at the pirate ship in Ukraine, in Ivano-Frankivsk, I'm trying. It is 3:02 a.m. Frankivsk.
No, Frank Evsk. Yeah, there you go. It's tough. Yeah.
I know.
Because you've got Franciscans on the brain, so it's a problem.
It is, yeah. In the workers' paradise, it is 8:03 a.m. In Hangover Bay, Australia. It is 9 a.m. A little early for sake, but I'm sure that crickets from the vending machine would work at the Kinki University in Osaka, Japan. Whew. On bullshit. What is wrong with me today? On Bullshit Hill in Australia, it is 9:33 a.m. And in Spanker Knob, it is 10:03 a.m. there in Australia. Then we're going to come back to some sanity, not really, on Monday, July 13th, where it is 9:33 p.m. in Dildo in Newfoundland, and 9:33 p.m. there. And in PP Township, Ohio, it is 8:04 p.m. And in, let's see here, Hooker, Oklahoma, it is 7:04 p.m. And in Slickpoo, Idaho, it is 6:04 p.m. And in Pump Tulips, Washington, it is 5:04 p.m. And in Unalaska, Alaska, the most Alaska place you could ever imagine is Unalaska, Alaska, where it is 4:04 p.m., where Sarah Palin could see Russia from her house. She quit stalking me, thank God. And that's all I got to say about that.
Sure, she's retreated in despair because you never interacted with her.
Oh, I'm sure. I am absolutely sure. I actually thought perhaps she might want to move to South Carolina to see if she could actually get a job in government again. It might work for her there. Anyway, sorry.
No, you're
Uh, I had to say that when an American was up as co-host because I think it flew right over Mocker's head last night.
well. Thank you so much.
That's okay. Nepotism is alive and well, and evidently his sister has been appointed to to complete his term. So
Which is only till January anyway. So it's I mean
unless she
there is.
decides to run, I'm
Mm,
sure she'll
well,
have to do all that
I'm
campaign.
keeping my fingers crossed for Nikki Haley.
I wouldn't, there are definitely worse options in the world, in my opinion. And that's from a dang liberal Democrat.
I love you anyway.
Yeah, I know. I love you too, even though you're freaking conservative. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Oh my God. It's a good thing we're really good friends. Otherwise, people might think we
Oh,
may
it
hate
really
each
is.
other. All right, Will, stop putting stuff in the nest and talk to your co-host.
Ready. Was that
There you
consulate?
go.
Sorry, I was speaking orc again there, wasn't I?
Oh God.
Oh my God. Uh, so yeah, welcome to
Vivitayo. We'll
Accidental
try some
Ukrainian,
Ukrainian.
which does occasionally have a word shared between orc and Ukrainian because they live next door. You know, you can't help but pick up some garbage occasionally. Um, yeah,
Although, as
welcome
you know,
everybody.
Orc is a younger language than Ukrainian. You do know. I heard the explanation of why Orc sounds the way it does. It's because the Mongols came in and tried to learn Ukrainian, but they couldn't quite do it, so they ended up with Russian.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. So, look, there have been uh, a ballistic missile attack on Kyiv this morning already, or in the nighttime still. Apparently, 8 ballistic missiles, 6 of which appear to have been shot down. So, somebody got some Aster 30 missiles or Patriot missiles and has been interdicting these. Reported also is that these are not Kinzhals. Russia is just using S-300, 400 missiles to fire them into Kyiv these days, and in ground attack mode. And as I pointed out yesterday, uh, strictly a terror weapon. Right? There is
Yeah.
no way to accurately target or aim a S-300, 400 missile that's being used in ground attack mode. The warheads on them are all essentially shrapnel type munitions that end up being like cluster munitions when you use them in ground attack mode. They're meant to be fired way up into the air and create a huge shrapnel cloud, which shoots down planes. But when fired into the cities, they have a very short flight time of only about 5 to 7 minutes. They scream very characteristically coming in, and then they produce their huge shrapnel wad, which really aren't useful on uh, targets, hardened targets like that. But they do create a lot of damage, including when they get misfired over their own cities. When they do use them in air defense, I think they're probably just throwing them all at Ukraine in ground attack mode because Chuck Farr's got a the picture and aftermath of what Russia tried to say was a Ukrainian attack with a drone or drones on an area in Russia near Moscow, and it turned. You just look at the detail of the site, and it was clearly one very large missile, which Ukraine isn't using yet on Moscow, yet being the operative word. But Russia, look at this photo here today, this little video of 23 seconds of. Of the disaster created in a small village in the edge of Moscow. This will be the sort of damage that you see once Ukraine does start using ballistic missiles on Russia, but it won't be in village neighborhoods like this, it'll be on valid military targets. So the you so it's important to know two things. It's a massive piece of attempted disinformation by Russia, which doesn't bear up to the forensic examination of it, and that Russia's still shooting itself in the foot. There's a very interesting video in Krasnodar last night, probably down near Afipsky, where there's also been another explosion and a large fire formed there. Afipsky, remind you that there is a refinery in Afipsky, and as the sun comes up, we'll probably know more about what exactly was hit. But the Afipsky refinery, this if it was the Afipsky refinery, it'll be the 13th strike on that refinery, and it was last struck on the 11th of June, so it's probably done some repairs and ready to be back into operation and been struck again. Now, if that sounds exactly like what I've reported to you over the past 4 days at other refineries, that I think is exactly what's happening. They're waiting. Ukraine is watching closely, and when Russia gets a refinery, looks like it's back into operation, all or part of it, they strike it again to carry on the campaign. I will call get them down and keep them down.
Those Ukrainians are so polite, though. They don't attack them when they're in the middle of making the repairs. They let them finish them first. It's really very nice of them.
Yeah, well, you want them to make sure that they've finished putting all those new spare parts in and run all the expensive cabling and control network and everything, and then when they're started up, and when you start up one of these processes in refineries, Robin, they take
Oh,
a bit
I'm
of
honored for you to call me mockers. Thank you.
yeah. Well, it takes a bit of teasing around, and it's frustrating. And then, boy, when you finally get everything right and you're right at the sweet spot, you go, boy, that's fantastic. That'll run great. Now, boom, and yeah. So it's a injury not sufficient, insult incoming.
There's something I've been wondering about. I was just thinking about it this afternoon. In the last few weeks, there's been a steady, there have been some large attacks, but even on the days that Kyiv is not being attacked, they always let loose a few ballistic missiles. It's been practically every day. And I was wondering, we know that supposedly Poland has supplied 3 Patriots. Thank you. Better than nothing.
Come on,
But they're
5.
up. Oh, okay. But there are other Patriots apparently in the pipeline. At least we don't know exactly what. I'm wondering whether or not Russia is keeping up this low level barrage, which does enough damage anyway, just to see if they can suss out if there are Patriots and where they are.
Absolutely correct. That they have been striking Dnipro and other locations with ballistics, just a few ballistics, and the drones now that they're using are being well, they're used in the mass attacks on Kyiv, but they're using a lot of the drones that they're launching, which is still lower than the number Ukraine's using every day. But the drones they are launching, they've headed toward Chernomorsky in Odesa again, going for the ports area. They've shot down all of the drones, the 30 drones that were headed toward Odesa in the last several hours. But Russia is now using their jet-powered drones, the Garan G5s, with their more advanced targeting system on them and pattern recognition kind of video to be able to target the ships in the port in Odessa more accurately. And they have also hit the no ship was hit there overnight, but what was hit was the grain loading facilities and the sunflower oil loading facilities at the port. So, uh, Russia may be claiming, oh, those are economic support lines for Ukraine, so we'll hit those. But food stuff shipments in as far as commercial material, not. You're on a very tenuous justification there, if you want to call that a militarily significant target. Russia doesn't actually do these calculations I'm talking you through in my head for proportionality and collateral damage. They're literally just trying to strike whatever they can in Ukraine, and civilian targets are obviously the easiest. So they're just striking all of that. The bombing in cities, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Sumy, anybody that's close enough for Russia to launch MLRS or glide bombs at is copping it a bit, but the drone activity toward Odesa today doesn't look to have been effective so far. And as they say, it appears 6 of 8 ballistics shot down in Kyiv, and the others have landed and done some property damage, but no injury reports as yet. So fairly ineffective for the cost of firing those weapons again. And Robin, and then the other top news story has to be that Magyar's birds are continuing their work down in the Sea of Azov, striking another 5 vessels since reported yesterday, and we're now up to a total in July of 111. So that'll obviously have to slow down because they're running out of vessels. And when I said yesterday, a little bird told me that the remainder had fled toward Kafkaz. That's exactly what has happened with Ukraine now striking vessels in and near Kafkaz port, and the ferries that were the vehicle ferries that they're running back and forth from Kafkaz to Kerch, and they've struck everybody who headed toward Kafkaz after striking the oil loading facilities a couple of days ago up at Taganrog and Azov. So I'm going to watch. Oh, there's a new indications and warnings out from Chuck Farr and Alan, and I'm going to watch that later today because I still am waiting for anybody to explain to me why Russia would operate a completely unprotected convoy of fuel and cargo ships on the Sea of Azov to try to resupply Crimea that way with no protection on the water and no air superiority. Make that make sense to me militarily.
No, it's absolutely astonishing. And apparently, one of the things they did was in their rush to get all of these ships going toward Crimea, and as you know better than I do, but they can only offload a certain amount a day, and all these other ships are waiting. It's like that 40-mile convoy to Kyiv at the beginning of the war, where they just pick them off one after the other. They can't go anywhere; they're just sitting there. And yeah, it's President what's his name, General Zaluzhny warns us to not take the Russians to not to assume that they're too incompetent. But boy, oh boy, sometimes it's very hard not to. I mean, how stupid can you be? It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, with loading and unloading facilities are limited at both ends of the Sea of Azov, and now the most dangerous job in Russia isn't driving from Taganrog down to Jankoy. It's now got to be sitting on a 7,000-ton fuel tanker, waiting for several days, up to probably 20 days, parked at anchor off of Kerch in order to try to unload your fuel. But that's not what they're doing. They've all been smoked or headed for shelter somewhere else. But the shelter somewhere else is Kafkaz, which of course has been hit many, many times before. So it's not a very good hiding spot. It just, make this make sense to me militarily. Anybody who's a military buff, especially,
Exactly.
we
And
we got to get we got to get what's his name, our former the guy who's the Navy guy, the gruff Navy guy who's always. I would love to have him on and have him make sense of this to me.
Bearded Brett? Who are you thinking of? That's anyway.
Him too. And I'm thinking of the guy who does all the whiskey sampling stuff. Anyway.
All right. Anyway, what was I thinking? I've completely gone out of my mind whatever I was going to say. Sorry.
And of course, I took a drink right as you took over.
Oh, sorry about that. No, I absolutely can't. I
So
had I had something insightful to say, and it absolutely fled my mind. Sorry.
nine additional targets of substations in Crimea, also the subject of Maggar's Bird's work. Also, two air defense radars, a Tor M1 air defense missile system, and an S-400 missile system in Crimea. So they're still absolutely totally reducing air defense that's left in Crimea, keeping the power off, keeping the fuel out. And Gunny, that's who I'm looking for. Gunny, I would love to have him make sense of this convoy for me.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
he doesn't like me. So
Well, he
someone
hasn't
else
been.
ask him.
Yeah, he hasn't been around in a while. The one thing I just wanted to point out, because it bears pointing out that Ukraine has managed to smoke over 100 of these ships. And have you noticed any huge oil slicks washing up on the shores in Turkey? Anywhere else?
No.
No, they really
Well,
they.
in it'd be on the sea, on the shores of Russia or
Oh, right.
occupied Crimea, but no
Good.
significant oil slicks other than a minor slick inside the port at Kerch,
Right,
where the vessel was damaged and unloading.
right, which means, I mean, they have gone out of their way, and it doesn't surprise me, but they've gone out of their way to render these ships unusable, but at the same time not opening up the holes and spilling polluting and making a mess out of the environment. It's really it just, I mean, it just, it shows who we're dealing with, and who the Ukrainians are having to deal with. This is Ukraine will go out of its way to try to protect the environment, even in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, I mean it's they do appear to be very responsible, as I noted from day one of this activity, that with the ships being struck in the bridges, because these are small tankers. Ukraine, when they're attacking the big tankers, they attack the props and the engine rooms of the vessels to disable them, and typically hit those big super tankers when they're headed back toward Novorossiysk or in the Black Sea to be refilled, which is also very responsible. Kill empty tankers heading to fill up with crude, but when it's product tankers and they're these 3,000, 7,000, maybe 10,000 deadweight ton vessels, they've been striking the bridge and the top decks of the vessels. Look at my tweet with the pit videos from about 6 days ago, and I noted that they are being. That is a pretty responsible way to do it, because if you attack the top decks of the fuel tankers, they'll burn down to the water line and burn up most of the fuel and won't create a huge environmental spill of diesel fuel or gasoline or jet fuel when they do that. So yeah, it's very responsible. Now, when I published that, of course, the Vatniks jumped all over me, because they said, I was claiming that at that time they'd sunk 175,000 tons of cargo and fuel vessels. And of course, they jumped on me and said, they're not sunk. They're not sunk. Yeah, okay, so they're not sunk, but they're lost, right? They lost the largest single convoy loss ever in the Second World War was 142,000 tons of cargo vessels lost trying to send stuff to the Soviet Union from America. And as of day 4 on this activity, Ukraine had already, I said, sunk 175,000 tons of vessels, and that's when they jumped all. They're not sunk. Well, you know what? Cargo that doesn't break the blockade, or fuel that doesn't break the blockade, I'm counting it. And I think Smokey said he approved that count on the weekend.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And now
And
they are up well over 300,000 tons of shipping eliminated.
amazing. And this is by a country that does not have a navy, let us remember.
Yeah, and it also goes to point out, that this is the most lethal battlefield in the history of warfare, because that convoy strikes in Germany with U-boats and the Luftwaffe strafing it all, took them a couple of weeks. This is been surpassed that in 5 or 6 days, and these things, basically don't miss. They deliver their payload exactly where you want it to on these vessels to knock out the bridge and set the tops of the vessels on fire. And I don't see any evidence of Russia being able to shoot down any significant amount of them uh, from the air, and they've backed off. They had some Su-27, Su-30 activity over the Sea of Azov early on, but I accidentally think I blew it for Russia or for Ukraine, and I suggested that on day 2 of this operation that they were trying to suck the VKS into responding and provide air cover for their vessels in the Sea of Azov so that they could shoot them down with Frankensams like they've done before. But of course, Russia didn't have any serious success in shooting down the drones, these FP2s, and has backed right off with the VKS. They're making no serious attempt to protect these vessels in the Sea of Azov, which it just absolutely makes no sense to me, whatever. So militarily, also, there have been some good strikes. The attack drones, about 400, look to be headed past Moscow. They're headed deeper into the country again today. We'll find out more about those later on. But the SBU has also been out hunting in the Black Sea with a couple of their a couple of the 12 150 Mangus type patrol boats hit by the SBU in the Black Sea, and they've been striking military and logistics and fuel targets last night as well, including a very impressive ammunition dump strike in Donetsk in Shakhtarsk, which had some really nice secondaries. So that was attractive. And down in Kafkaz, the Magyar's birds have struck the rail depot that the tanks using transshipment tanks in Kafkaz and vessels at port there, particularly the automobile ferries that they're using to shift fuel tankers across in. So that's the military strikes that I can see since I was on yesterday, Robin, and it has been a moderate day of activity from Russia's attacks on civilian targets. But the attacks close to the front that Russia is doing is, Ukraine. They're just fighting a different war. Ukraine is striking fuel depots. They struck Mykolaiv again yesterday because they go back in Krasnodar, and if they don't like how much damage they've done, they come back and blow the rest of it up the next day. And in response, Russia attacks petrol stations. Petrol petrol stations, not only are they, basically used by civilians, the military does fuel up at them occasionally, but not regularly. It's not their supply. They're using drones on petrol stations and setting the propane tanks that are above ground, and the Bowsers are getting knocked off, and it does a really impressive job of blowing up a forecourt. Those petrol stations aren't built out of reinforced concrete, so they do a big spectacular blow up, and then I'm not kidding you, within about 24 hours, the Ukrainians will have the entire forecourt rebuilt and the petrol stations back up and running. This is it is neither a proportional response nor is it effective. So please continue, Russia. I mean, I would hate to be at one of those petrol stations, the civilians, when they attack these things, but that is not a proportional and significant response to Ukraine blowing up all of your depots, refineries, and fuel transport capabilities. They are not There is no indication whatever that Ukrainian military forces are suffering any fuel supply problems as yet.
Well, so much of what Russia's doing now has really no effect on the front line or on the military. It's aimed at inflicting maximum pain on civilians. It's really it's not surprising, but it's reprehensible as it continues to be.
Yeah. So international news, of course. Zelensky traveled to this meeting of the coalition of the willing and the air defense thing, and did get some. They do have some solid results out of that. They've decided to signed and formed an air defense coalition for Europe, with all the appropriate countries involved, and on the side of that. Ukraine has also penned the deal we were talking about previously, and got an agreement in place in writing with France to not only supply 16 Rafale fighter jets in the 28 to 29 period, so that's a bit a way off, but the Mirage 2000 pilots will be able to graduate to the Rafale system, both being French, I would think, relatively easy. But what they'll probably do is take the Mirage 2000 pilots that get experience, they'll turn them into pilot trainers on the Rafale, but then they'll be training other pilots immediately. The more interesting immediate result here is that not only is Ukraine going to be licensed to produce the Scalp cruise missiles domestically, they've also got in that agreement with France the capability to produce ASSM Hammer guided missiles, guided bombs, and the Aster 30 missiles, which go into the SAM-T system. And this, I think, along with the announcements they've made about the FP7X missile from Firepoint that they're going to put into their own air defense system. I think this is where the where the coalition of the willing and the air defense coalition is going to go. Dennis Stillerman described a system that is comprised of a little packet of 4 FP7X missiles, that they'll put a radar system and a guidance system, build their own Frank and Sam, if you will, but Frank and Sam in conjunction with their European partners to produce a system that will be as effective as a Patriot in shooting down ballistics. But those 4 FP7 missiles will still cost less than half of what one Patriot missile does. And they're also, going to probably get a license from the American government to produce Patriot missiles. I'm sure that Raytheon doesn't want to lose out the entire market of Europe to this consortium that's going to start to build their own air defense system. But the SAM-T is also capable of shooting down ballistic missiles, not as well as the Patriot, but I think with Ukrainian involvement here, they'll take the radar targeting system of the SAM-T, do some work with it, build their own cheaper missile packets to go with it, and that will probably end up being what the Freya missile system is, Robin.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I was thinking, looking at this anti-ballistic coalition, it's all the major players in Europe, and not the United States. And I'm looking at this. It's only going to be a matter of time before Raytheon and Grumman and all of these other companies realize that Trump has managed to give away all of their possible markets, that the Europeans are turning to self-help and to weapons that aren't going to be subject to restrictions after they're bought. So I think this is a very positive advance for Ukraine and for Europe, and I think it's going to really bite the American defense industry in the long run.
Yeah, and what you can expect to see is with the European consortium, and they say doing it within a year. I mean, that seems unbelievably fast for the development of this. But if at this point, when the Ukrainian government says we're going to do this within a year, then I believe it'll probably happen within a year, to tie all these things together, these disparate components. And Raytheon, Lockheed are absolutely seeing the end of their market share. So I would expect, to be honest, the cost of Patriot missiles to start to drop drastically, because you're talking about a competitor with no supply restrictions, no use restrictions and a quarter or something like that the cost, you're not going to, even if you're allowed to produce those things in Ukraine, you're not going to be able to compete on cost with the indigenous systems. And like Stillerman was talking about when he was saying, yeah, we're probably going to fire 4 Freya missiles or these FP7X missiles. We're probably going to fire 4 of those every time. Just fire the whole packet and put a new cartridge on when we see a ballistic, rather than try to figure out how to do it cheaper, which they may well do too. But we're going to go ahead and just fire them in packs of 4 when we see a ballistic, because that way we'll approach the efficacy of a Patriot, but we'll do it at 1/4 the cost. So, they're really taking the efficiency and making sure that when they counter Russian systems, they are countering them in a way that it always costs Russia more than it does Ukraine to defend, and that is a good approach because logistics and cost and everything in the long term are going to win this war. But the other part of this that I find the best is which is we first talked about, that I was quite excited about, the SAM-T, or sorry, not the not the Aster missile for the SAM-T, which is important, but most important to me is the licensing of the production of the Scalp cruise missile, because the Scalp cruise missile, which has proved phenomenally effective at knocking out uh, defense factories and pinpointing the Black Sea Fleet headquarters and things like that, has a precision along the lines of what the Neptune does of Ukraine, or even better. That if they can produce those, and they also produce a version that is like the Apache missile, which is what the Scalp was originally, which is a missile that's meant to fly down the length of a runway and drop penetrating explosive charges to make sure that Russia can't use its runways. That's a really important development for Ukraine, because the missiles that can take out the factories that make components for ballistic missiles, missiles that can take out runways so that they can't fly their glide bombers nearly as well. These are the things that are going to be effective in reducing the most damaging strikes of Russia. It's no, I'm not releasing any OSINT or anything uh, confidential to say that the biggest problem of Ukraine after the ballistics has got to be the glide bombs. So making that glide bomb attacks less possible, and taking out those planes when they can find them on the ground, and the Iskander missile launchers when they're on the ground, or the S-400 systems, is going to be the way to stop the ballistics and glide bomb problem. At the end of the day, air defense is great, but as Stillerman also says, the spear always defeats the shield eventually when you're talking about air defense type ballistics.
The other thing that we can't lose sight of in all of this is there are a lot of really good things coming, and I think Ukraine is getting into a position where they're going to be in very good shape in a few months. But we do have that gap between now and when Ukraine is adequately provisioned with, especially the anti-ballistic missiles. President Zelensky has been making a point at this Coalition of the Willing meeting that he's asking for 300 Patriots ahead of the winter, and 300 Patriots. Remember how many Patriots they blew in against Iran? 300 Patriots is nothing.
They used more than 800 in the first 2 weeks.
Exactly. So I mean, and I know that there's some um, quasi secret negotiations going on between Poland and the United States, where I think what is it, if they, for every Patriot they release, they're guaranteed 20 if it should, immediate delivery if push come to shove with the Russians. which is a pretty good deal, I'll tell you. But hopefully, this does mean that there will be more patriots coming in. But as Zelensky says, before the winter hits again, it's going to be extremely important that especially the energy infrastructure who can be defended, because it's not going to be back the way it was even by the winter. It's still going to be pretty severely compromised, and they can't.
Compromised for capacity, but also more resilient because it'll be spread out
Well, yes,
and
and they're
less
they're
capable
definitely.
of being taken out in total.
That is true. I mean, and they're working on that, but unfortunately, because of the way the systems are set up, and the need for not only to have the generators and things in place, but also for municipalities to have the money to be able to implement some of this stuff, this winter is still going to be pretty dicey.
And as we were talking about yesterday with with Ming and others, one of the things that Japan is doing to really ramp up support for Ukraine is specifically in the production of transformers, medium and large transformers, which they have a huge capacity to make in Japan, and they have committed to making sure that when transformers get knocked out in Ukraine, they can be replaced, as opposed to uh, the capability of Russia to do that for itself. Russia will try to supply itself with Chinese uh, transformers, but they won't be as good, and they'll cost just as much. And Ukraine. So yeah, this combination of things that's coming, right? This winter is not going to be as bad for Ukraine, but it's going to be much worse for Russia, because Ukraine will also have ballistic missiles available. It will target the ballistic missile capability of Russia with its long range weapons, the FP5 in particular. It will have ballistic missiles of its own, so that it can knock out the ballistic missile launch capability of Russia and do significant damage to its power infrastructure in response, uh, particularly near these large generation facilities that Russia has yet to have lost itself. Imagine if you have another winter where Russia is starting to see ballistic missile take out its significant sized power plants and its significant sized substations near the nuclear power generations. If Russia has an electrical system collapse along the lines of what Ukraine has had, I just don't believe they will weather it nearly as well. And that's coming for them. So they'll both eliminate part of the capability for Russia to do that level of damage to them. They will be more resilient this winter than last. But yeah, they have to make it through another winter. And in order to do that, production of Aster 30 missiles, and procurement of a lot more Patriot missiles is going to be important for them, as well as keeping up the building out of the Ukrainian Air Force, so that they can continually push back uh, the Russian VKS and not be able to launch glide bombs on Ukrainian cities close to the front, like they're doing now. So it's all building, but they have to build their way out of this, because nobody has been in a position to provide them the level of immediate support that they've needed since the United States exited the scene. So, but as I said, in December of 2024. Ukraine can build their way out of this problem with support of Europe, and they are doing so, right? A year and 6 months on, they're doing exactly what we predicted they could do, and it's going pretty well, uh, considering, especially if you consider the fact that with the offensive attacks that Ukraine has been able to make, I didn't predict the mid-range strike capability at all, but they're really maximizing that. And in maximizing that mid-range strike capability, they're forcing Russia to react, which also removes the capability of Russia to sit back and plan all of its long-range strategic strikes, not in the comfort that it is not going to be degraded itself. But Russia had better, unless they want to lose this war really quickly, Russia had better be putting the maximum of its effort into trying to solve the logistics problems that Ukraine is creating for them in the temporarily occupied territories and Crimea. I say that as advice to the Russians, knowing specifically that they're not doing that, but that's what they should be doing right now, because they're getting prepared to be gutted up and down the line, and Crimea is isolated and will remain isolated until the point where Russia, it'll become a non-entity. Ukraine's not going to invade land forces like Russia says in Crimea, but Crimea will cease to be an asset for Russia militarily, and will have to continue to provide protection for it defensively, and bleed them out over time, because they're making the capability of Russia to do anything militarily on Crimea basically null and void. And it won't be long before you actually see Ukrainian jets, not just drones, jets flying missions over Crimea. And that'll also be coming this, well, they'll keep it quiet, but I'm sure that'll also be coming this fall as well. So, look, overall, things are going pretty well. The bad things that seem to be happening, Robin, we better talk about, are the proposed changes for the proposed changes in the government in Ukraine. Obviously, the prime minister is resigning, and they'll change her entire government.
Yeah, that I'm very upset about, by the way, Will. I finally learned her name just this week, and already she's being moved. Apparently she's going to be appointed ambassador to the United States, which will be interesting.
While I was very happy
We'll see
about the last change in government and cabinet, including Budnov, Fedorov, all those changes at that time, I'm less excited about this one, because why change now is the thing I can't understand. She might be more. Well, I understand the U.S. ambassador to the United States wants to leave of her own accord, and she had for personal reasons, and she was relatively underexperienced. Took a while to get credentials. She might be considered a little bit out of her depth in America, but who cares? I mean, to be honest, why does the ambassador from Ukraine to America need to be anything other than pleasant? Because you're not going to get any love out of that administration, and just being pleasant and getting along seems to be fine for me. And the prime minister was also seemed to be very effective, and she's only been in position there for 6 or 7 months. I just don't understand the change there at that point, and this talk, which is just talk at this point, but the talk about replacing Fedorov because he doesn't get along with Syrskyi, and he's trying to put reform through the defense, the Ministry of Defense, much more rapidly than some people like, is very troubling. Zelensky would be very wise to trust his gut on why he got Fedorov in there in the first place, and why he should leave Fedorov in there now, as opposed to making a change, because he's been phenomenally effective. I'll remind you that it only took one conversation between Fedorov as Minister of Defense and Elon Musk to eliminate the Starlinks being used immediately by Russia through an immediate workaround, and then a permanent disabling of those things. Literally within, they said within 3 days. It happened within 24 hours. So that caused the entire Russian offensive west of Huliapoli to slow down, and allowed Ukraine to move in and counter their activity down there now, where the biggest collapse of the Russian military is taking place north of Huliapoli. And all of that was set up primarily by Fedorov having one conversation with Elon Musk. I just can't believe it's a good idea to change him out at this point.
The thing to be careful of here, though, Will, I agree with you. I think Fedorov has been very good. Apparently, he doesn't get along all that well with Zelensky either. And unfortunately, we've seen a repeated pattern of people who Zelensky doesn't get along with being shuttled out to something else. This is a problem. But the other thing to remember, and this is very important, and I think we have constantly, whenever we hear possible negative news like this, I mean, it may very well be true, but we can never forget that it is in Russia's vested interest to get Ukrainians fighting with each other, to get people outside of Ukraine questioning what the government is doing and questioning President Zelensky in particular. So I agree with everything you're saying here, but I do think we need to be careful not to assume that we know for sure, because we don't know where these reports are coming from. And they could easily have been planted, even in Ukraine, they could easily have been planted primarily by Russian disinformation sources.
Well, not all of them, because the Telegram conversations that are going. There is a big network of Telegram channels inside Ukraine that aren't subject to a lot of Russian um, influence, but are subject to the internecine, fighting and squabbling that can happen. And these sorts of things happen when things start to go better. When things are going terrible for you, Ukraine, well, like everybody, when things are going bad for you, everybody in Ukraine gathers together and hunkers down and solves the problem. But once things start to look better, and a young reformer is in there and he's trying to do things. I mean, I remember this from my engineering career, being the young guy who's come in and done something like produce an invention for a factory, and then you're trying to work that all through the system. The people who are like things the way they are, or are in fact have a vested interest, like a moneyed interest, in things remaining the same, obviously then try to slow down reform. And I think Fedorov gets along fine with Zelensky, but he makes Zelensky's life uncomfortable because he doesn't get along with Syrskyi and the other old timers in the defense ministry who don't want things to change at all. And he's probably been a
Yeah,
little
that's
bit overly
possible.
ambitious as a young fella. He probably did make some moves to have Syrskyi replaced. And if a change had to be made at this point, because I watch the opinions of people, it isn't my decision to make. I watched the same thing go on with Zelensky and Reznikov and or Zaluzhny, and the same thing with Syrskyi. The plus minus of everybody talking about where these guys are, and if I had a situation in the Ukrainian military system now, where the reformer, unless he's done something egregiously wrong, is getting pushback and problems from Syrskyi. Syrskyi's now been in place for 2.5 years, something like that. It might be time to change him rather than Fedorov. But of course, Syrskyi's got a very big lobby there over his time and solidified his position. And the military is doing pretty well, but they're doing pretty well on the backs of work done or led primarily by Fedorov. So I would either get these two guys together in a room and smash their heads together and say, you're going to find a way to get along, or I'm getting rid of both of you, or um, move along the person who appears to be their most recalcitrant and not working toward the victory that they all should still be looking at, like when things were tough.
Apparently, there is some reporting that there are elements that are not particularly enamored of aggressive anti-corruption measures. Not necessarily that people are corrupt themselves. That didn't say that, but they're people who would just be, as you're saying, would be happy to leave the system more or less in place rather than going full bore on the anti-corruption measures inside the military. So that's an issue too. And I think also Fedorov, you get these old people, these people like Syrskyi who've been in the military for a million years. They get offended by someone without military experience who comes in, and regardless of whether they're good ideas or not, they're not always able to listen. And I think this is part of the issue. Fedorov, maybe, I mean, it might have been better if there had been a little bit of working on them getting along together before he came in all guns blazing, but he has done an incredible job in a few months. So maybe this is just the fallout that has to happen.
I mean, yeah, you need to get used to the change, and for if you're coming in new, you've got to be sensitive of changes that or things that people can pick out and pick on, right? The when I was young in my engineering career and was having some success, one of the things that the old timers picked upon was the fact that I produced all of my work in metric, and that went down like a lead balloon in some of the old factories in Chicago and Iowa. I can tell you. But you live and you learn as a young person, and success is also a good way to turn some of these old timers' minds around, and some of that's happened. Anyway, I hope this doesn't result in a change of Fedorov, because I think Fedorov is doing an excellent job, and I also agree with Ponomarenko that the public also knows that the things are going well, and they're making the correlation and causation ties between Fedorov coming in, and he believes that it's the sort of thing that might end up with people on the streets. And that Ukrainians are not at all shy about expressing their opinions when the government makes moves they don't like. Robin?
Oh yes, indeed, and that's something that has to be kept in mind for sure. I see Lexicon has her hand up. Lexicon, is this still the middle of the night for you, or have you moved since I last spoke to you?
No, it's still in the middle of the night. I actually set an alarm. It's dying to talk to you guys. Thanks for the space. Good to hear from you. Yeah, this is a little concerning. Yeah, Ponomarenko and the rest of the chattering classes here, the ones who chatter to each other, not to us on Twitter, are certainly mustering a core of support to Fedorov. But there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot being aimed at Zelensky, and I do find that that's disconcerting to me, because it looks to me like one way or another he's pulled this amazing team together. When you'll recall, when this last reshuffling took place, we were really pleased with what we said looks like the team for victory. I think that Will definitely said that, a team to win this war. Now, the thing is, for the U.S. ambassador, some people are saying, you've probably mentioned it, that Syridenko is kind of the Scott Bessent whisperer that he is, that what they're acknowledging is that the position of ambassador to the U.S. is an extremely important one, and they've got to be able to handle the relationship with America in this crunch time that's here upon us, and only getting more more heavier and heavier crunch. It's important that the U.S. ambassador be really able to deal with the angst. So that suits me fine if that's what's going on. How the hell would I know? But there's some other stuff that I've begun to hear. I've been trying to listen to these chattering elements who chatter, as I say, just on the Ukraine TV and stuff. Yesterday we had a lecture from you probably, I don't know if you remember him, or were here another time, Yuri Pedlitsky, who's a big prof in the political science department. And I asked him a bit of stuff, because one of the things I started to hear from some of these outspoken analysts, or I don't know, would-be influencers, is that the whole affair with Nabu and what was it called, Sapu?
Sapo, yeah.
Yeah, Sapo. We have heard that those two institutions were set up in Maidan, Dignity Revolution times, because the Americans or Europeans, well, Americans, and possibly as well the Europeans, definitely they wanted these things. They understood them. They wanted them set up. They wanted to set up in some image they liked, and that the Ukrainians have been feeling, and probably Zelensky not least among them, that they're kind of a wedge, that there's some link that's way too close a link to the U.S. Bitlitsky says you might call him a branch of the CIA, but he really accepted that this story that there's this story has legs, and when Zelensky was moving on them, one of his motivations was that they just got too much. This experience Ukraine has had of being told by the Americans what they can and cannot do and must not do and so on. So anyway, he said he talked with the young kids last year when they were demonstrating, and he says the kids, what do they know? They don't know what Napu who really is and Sapo. But he said the thing is, they said we want to save our institutions, so that's a good thing. But and that's very good that this generation is going to in his lecture he explained how the degrees of greater and greater degrees of political sophistication that the Ukrainian people's demands have demonstrated, manifested. So he yeah, I think he anyway, he gave us to believe that not all that looks like it seems, and Nabu and Sapo are not as pure as the driven snow. And in fact, you may have seen, because this came out in some of the articles I think I saw on Twitter, that some people are saying there's always pushback on people about corruption, like when well, I'll explain in a second, but that some of this may have hit the present ambassador, current ambassador, and she may not just want that, some kinds of efforts to say she's under suspicion, and she may just not want to carry that, give the Americans this fun. But the kind of discussion, what I asked Bidlisky to explain a bit, or what he did, is that like every time we just talked about the general fact that all of the restrictions that have been placed throughout the war, both administrations, on Ukraine, and how difficult these are, and the fact that Ukraine has become so big and capable that this is a threat to the American defense industry and to American ability, its flex. And that every time Ukraine gets looks like it's getting too big for its britches in the point of view of these characters in the American whatever military government industrial complex, they try to rein it in. So right now, we see what's happening. Ukraine is going on a path that's extremely looks really successful, and the i- impact is massive so quickly. And there's all of these people paying attention to what Putin has to say, and holding conferences and talking about peace. I mean, I think he appeared to agree that Ukraine just needs to win this militarily, and all this peace stuff on the side are sidelines that our dear friends are keep showing up and imposing on Ukraine. So I think that his view was that every time, aside from what conflicts there may be, I don't know, within the cabinet, he wasn't entirely discussing that, but the fact that there's just going to be, for now and forever, this constant tussle as Ukraine becomes one of the big players, and the big players who are being assailed by China and so on, that America is, never mind what Russia's doing, may have some pushback about that. I think that it sounds like Ukraine is extremely clear about it. What I think they're mustering a lot of support for Federal, and he apparently, some people say he was offered the prime ministership and said he wouldn't take it, and thank God. Obviously, he wouldn't. He's just busy winning the war. That's all. So why not keep doing it? But yeah, Petlitsky is really good in giving a nuanced and really complex view of what's going on here. I just find when a student asks me, a foreign student, what's happening with Zelensky? Why are they slinging so much mud at him? And that is you really see here the what we've discussed before, the proclivity of Ukrainians to be really skeptical about their politicians, and the higher the politician, the higher the skepticism. So I think that there's a general view that Zelensky, A, is doing a stunning job, and B, has feet of clay, and these two exist at the same time. And Ukrainians are still remaining skeptical, and they're waiting for the proof. Um, but yeah, just to say that this is more complex, and as we move towards more decisive stages, with their not diminishing complexities, on the contrary, a lot of this may happen. Yeah, I've got my fingers crossed for Fedorov. There have been some good names coming up for Prime Minister, the former head or just the recent few months head of the energy ministry, who's done a good job cleaning up that mess. So anyway, just to tell you about those things, I'm not sure how much of them you've heard or picked up on, but yeah, this is sounding wow. I can't wait to move on to the next city, the belly of the beast, and see what I can hear. But yeah, it's really worth listening to some of these Ukrainian commentators just to get an idea of of what's of what the while the ins and outs, and hopefully not internecine conflicts, but my God, with great power comes great responsibility. Back to you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Lexicana. Thank you for getting up to join us. Yeah, this whole issue with Zelensky. This is something that there's been a disconnect between the he has been in some corners outside of Ukraine. He has been given sainthood practically. Ukrainians don't they don't go in for sainted political figures, and it's I think that this is. I think it's dangerous to make him into too perfect a figure. For one thing, as Adam has said, very often, and I think we all agree, if Zelensky were not president, Ukraine would still be fighting. The Ukraine is not. It's not led, by one person. So I think that that's an important thing and I think it also gives, it gives you to put somebody up on a pedestal like that, as you're saying, every that person will always have feet of clay, and there's always going to be disappointments. It really is much better to evaluate the person as a normal human being, and we can appreciate the incredible things he's done. At the same time, can see that he does misstep a little bit sometimes, and this is just the way human beings are, and it doesn't take away from the incredible job that he's done. Back to you, Will.
Yeah, and the main point there is it's not my decision to make. I'm sure, and it doesn't matter how they shuffle things at the top, or even if Zelensky went. Ukraine isn't one person, and they will keep fighting, and still keep doing well, especially if Russia keeps doing things like sending hundreds of unsupported convoys to places like Crimea. So you're not going to change the basic nature of the countries and their way they're operating. I just feel that 6 months is far too short a period of time to give Fedorov, given his incredible amount of success to this point, and that the entire team ought to start look back to when this last reshuffle took place and make sure that everybody's eyes are still on the prize here, the overall win. Because
Yeah,
as I say,
exactly.
in teams like this, when things start to go well, sometimes you get backsliding in the cooperative nature of everyone, and they feel like they can open up and do point scoring and political stuff, and I just feel we ain't there yet. No reason at all to lose any efficiency at all in delivering the kind of pain they are to Russia up and down the board. Everything,
Yep. Yeah,
there are
exactly.
things coming in, diplomatic, political, all the axes that I've been talking about attacking: military, political, social, economic, and diplomatic. We're now seeing pressure on all five of those axes, and anything that is reducing the capability to provide maximum pressure on Russia is counterproductive, I think. And I don't know what the insides of it all, but if they're not looking at that big picture and making decisions on personnel changes in relation to that and that only, then I'm not very happy about it. But it's not up to me, of course. Dan,
And
what do you
of
think?
course,
Oh, sorry.
there's been a lot of there are reservations about Sersky. There have been from the beginning, and I know from talking to people who were when I was in Ukraine, people who are not in the military but are sort of adjacent, that there still is a lot of feeling that he is still from that old Soviet school, the top heavy, rule from the center, and that it is getting in the way of some of the reforms within the military. So I hope if they're going to do some reshuffling, Sersky might not be a bad one to be given another job and get someone else in there rather than Fedorov, who I agree, I think he's done an incredible job.
Yeah, and when we went from the Zaluzhny to Syrskyi change, I listened to all of the commentary back and forth across the lines, because here again, not my decision to make. I'm not on top of it as well as these folks are, but the military people at the time, I thought the change might be bad because of Syrskyi's Russian training background, and that he was far more willing to accept levels of casualties to obtain objectives. Sounds very Russian. Than he should have been, and some of the units that he has been involved in helping and supporting since that time he took over. That some people have changed their views a bit about Syrskyi, and others have still reinforced that there are problems in the way that he does things related to his former training and experience, and that he is very solidified in those positions. And the 155th brigade that was started up, separate brigade that was started up, has gone from, well, it's been a relative disaster, from its original planning and all the desertions that they had, and now the hierarchy being involved in corruption and brutality of people. It's that's not working, and that's tied to Syrskyi. So if Fedorov has made mistakes in how he's managing getting the reform through, I certainly don't think he's as big a problem as the other problems that they've got in the military hierarchy. And I agree. I just don't think 6 months is enough to make any sort of judgment on where he's going. And the people that I respect that are in the military in Ukraine that I've talked to directly, they think the same, and that's why I just don't think it's time for change yet. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about Fedorov. I think it's too early to make any judgments about him. Obviously, I mean, as far as him changing positions or being removed, and put somewhere else. But when you're describing this, Will and Robin, I'm visioning of the human beings are in a spoke of a wheel, and there's many fingers to this spoke, like you said before. Diplomatically, all over the world, there's different things that Ukraine is involved with, and it's for the health of their own government. The fact that they're changing position again. My question to you folks is, isn't this a healthy thing? I mean, I think it's certainly a healthy thing to do some change, especially when you're making as much successes as Ukraine has been making in the past few months. Never mind the last year. But what do you think?
I mean, so that's what I mean. The changes being done by Fedorov appear to be bearing fruit, and to stop them now, to change that change back to to something else before it's proved unsuccessful, doesn't seem to make sense. This uh, this uh, discussion about a change at the top seems premature, given the last change that was made, and the time that's taken place between now and then. And as you say, the results that we've seen. Lexi, go ahead.
I, I don't know if you've talked about this and I missed it, but um, along the lines of Pidlitsky's view, which was that Ukraine is absolutely determined to be in the driver's seat in this whole thing, and how masterful it's been. You'll notice that, like when I first heard, they're going to go off to Paris, and they're going to discuss peace, for Christ's sake. I just about spit every time I hear that word. But you see the way that's been turned around. Now, Zelensky has announced that he's, to the scoffing of some of the worldwide sources, but he's setting up a service. He's what he's zeroed in on is that there's too much stuff that's being promised and not delivered, and there's got to be a way to follow that up. And Zelensky has been saying that for every kind of branch of what's going on here, and I don't quite grasp how he's distinguished them, but at any rate, for every one of these key requirements Ukraine has in its alliance associations with its allies, there needs to be really specific responsibility in the Ukrainian team to follow that up and to make sure keep these allies' feet to the fire. And when you look at the agenda now, the way from the first I heard of Paris and today, they're meeting on Tuesday, which it is here. And now the whole agenda is about what capabilities they got to focus on. They did I focus on on patriots, on air defense for ballistics, the acquiring of capability for ballistics of their own, and a number of these things, like right down the line, the important stuff. I think that Zelensky overall, I absolutely think he's been masterful. The cabinet that he's had together in this past 6 months, the sequencing of, we almost forget, but the right at the beginning of June, I think the 3rd of June was. Yeah, Zelensky's open letter to Putin in its unconventional terms, and it really was a stunner. And then he gives the guy 2 weeks, and then he announces this 40-day campaign, and then this campaign with its advent calendar of refineries and so on, it sort of is moving. I think Dan or somebody was saying crescendo upon crescendo as it swells along. It's a symphony, man. And then the way this army is able to work together, and I just it's hard to believe that Sersky doesn't have something to do with it, but this has been a whole of army effort and whole of government effort. The way that this campaign, we'll look at it because it's effective on the front line. There's logistics being cut off. The lockdown is proceeding to affect the front line as much as, well, in addition to being really effective on Crimea. And hopefully more and more, Alan often focuses on the Kherson, the left bank concern, and we know there's going to be a need to move on the left bank somehow. So anyway, the cohesion of all of this is just absolutely brilliant. But at the same time, the determination of the Ukrainians and of Zelensky particularly to run this thing, to be the driver of the way it happens. And one reflection is the very rapid uh, determination of the definition of the content, the agenda for the meeting in Paris today. That's going to be led by Ukrainians, and they're not taking any guff. They're not going to be deviated from what they're doing, and if anything, they're going to focus the attention of these allies even more tightly on the jobs they have to do. And they're going to hear from Ukraine that, you're doing this for us, so let's see the progress in doing it. Well, I just applaud that. And if that's what's going on, and it does seem to make sense, man, I like it.
Yeah, I agree. The key when they started the Ramstein meetings, and they were effective at preventing the loss of Ukraine. It was the areas of focus were based on who had what capability and how they were going to provide that. That focus has sort of been lost again as Ukraine has been doing better. So Ukraine putting in place people with each of these partners to make sure that they follow through on commitments they've got, because it is phenomenally frustrating to us, of course, that look at it, and Zelensky, who's spoken out about it. And it's necessary when people make a commitment that they follow through on that commitment in a timely fashion. Otherwise, it's actually doing more damage than getting nothing at all. Brian?
So these ships that keep getting sent into the Sea of Azov to only, meet the fate of having the last image of the bridge people watch a drone, fly right into the bridge or the engine room. It's been going on for several days now. I think I don't remember who pointed this out, but it makes sense that I saw it where basically once that damage is that basically that ship is useless. There's no repairing it. Even if you could drag it to a repair yard, that doesn't mean that it could get hit in the repair yard, right? So, at what point, and I realize I'm asking folks to get in the Russian's head, which is a fool's errand in a lot of ways. But at what point do they just give up and say, okay, because at some point you run out of ships, right? To just throw it to the Sea of Azov to become floating monuments to the end of the shadow fleet. I don't understand you know what they think they're doing here, because the Ukrainians obviously have a firing solution for that whole area. So I mean, whatever you put out there is going to get blown up again. So I just don't understand what the end game is here.
Yeah, and
At
it
what
does
point do
look
they stop?
it does look a little bit like a meat wave approach of Russia to fill up these small riverine tankers and just head them toward Crimea in case any of them make it, right? But expect to lose them. But riverine tankers, even though Russia uses them quite heavily, and we talked about this yesterday afternoon when I was on, but I haven't had chance to do the research yet on uh, what the production rate of riverine tankers is in Russia, where they make them, and how many they have, because they tend to generally have too many, but having too many riverine tankers isn't like having too many human beings. The latency time for production is very, very long. So at what point will they start running out of these things to be useful up and down the Don and Volga River, if they waste too many of them in tanker waves that approach looking like meat waves? I suspect, well, I have suspected and been waiting to see Russia abandoning this approach to trying to supply Crimea with fuel in particular. And Oyvind, our friend from Norway, came up the other day and suggested a way around it, and I agree that is probably a possible attempt that they'll do, and that they probably have tried or are watch for pipe laying barges in the Crimea area, in the Kerch area, because they probably will try to lay some high density polyethylene piping across the Kerch Strait to provide fuel. But as pointed out, the entry point and pumping stations for any pipeline that they set up underneath the water, they won't be able to take the pipeline out, but it's got to come up somewhere. And when it comes up at the Kerch side, or they find the entry point at the Krasnodar side, it's going to face a lot of attention too. With Putin said yesterday, we're finding a way. We're finding a way to get fuel, supply Crimea in a way that the Ukrainians can't touch. Well, guess what? We're way ahead of you. We predicted what that was going to be, and I'm sure Ukraine is on top of that as well, Brian. But yeah, like tanks, like armored fighting vehicles, like everything, even riverine tankers are not in endless supply inside Russia. And I'm thinking of having Smokey's AI agent try to run us down what the production rate of riverine tankers between 3 and 10,000 tons in capacity are, where they make them in Russia, and how many they have on hand that they might not be. Well, how many they have on hand that they're not using, like the slack they have in that, because once we've eaten up all the slack, they won't be able to move fuel around inside Russia like they're doing now with tankers either. So more stress for them, and we'll see how that goes. The other thing that so when this campaign in Crimea started, I and we were first talking this heavy campaign. The 40 days started on June 26th. You know, all the questions at the time was, why don't they drop the Kerch Bridge? Why don't they drop? Well, I said at the time that they're almost certainly leaving the bridge open so that people can escape across it, so that they're not creating a siege where people will starve to death. There's always an exit point for you, and thankfully, Kalin, who gets all the good press, the young, attractive looking Irish fella, rather than a middle-aged white guy, you know, who's ugly and only you hear his voice. So I did not get an opportunity to talk to Magyar, but of course that little bastard gets to talk to everybody now because he's famous. But fortunately, he's asking all the right questions, and Magyar has confirmed exactly what I said at the beginning, which is they're leaving the Crimea bridge open as the escape route for Russians who are ready to vote with their feet, and they have been voting with their feet, and they will leave that open until the last minute when they want to drop it. When they will drop the Kerch Bridge is at the end when Russia decides it's untenable to hold Crimea, and they start trying to move military equipment in large amounts back across the bridge so that they can have it in Russia to wherever they want to use it next. That will be the time when they drop that bridge so that they can keep Russia from escaping with military capability when they evacuate Crimea. Would be my best guess of what they'll do now. But yeah, thank you, Kalin, for being famous and getting to ask the questions of people that I do, that I would like to. If that little bastard gets a interview with Budanov before I do, though, I'm going to be pretty pissed off. He's talking to my lawyers, Robin.
I'm sensing some
He
jealousy
is
here.
adorable though and does a great job. So what can
Robin.
you do, Will?
Robin,
Yeah.
No,
I'm sensing some jealousy
I give
here.
him a hard time, but he presents well. He, you know, like the Angish or Illumina thing. There were a lot of people that did work in that to get to the point where he started reporting on it, and those folks, including Mockers and Dan the Tanker Man and the others, they really won't get the credit that they deserve for getting that whole thing going. But at the end of the day, right, it'd be like us being in the government and pissing and moaning. I don't care as long as we get the result we want, and Kalen gets famous. Fine, that works for me too. But you know, every now and then you go, God damn it, I've been on this for I've been on the refinery thing since 2023, and now everybody shows up and they're all the instant experts show up and talk about how successful it was, and weren't around back when everybody's saying, oh no, that'll never work, and that's not a good use of those resources. But you just keep chugging along quietly, moving it. If you know something will work, just keep at it, and it will work. And I also note that the
Hey,
Angish
Chuck.
Illumina thing has been so successful that there's some Finnish guys who started up on a nickel facility there on a similar pattern, Robin.
Hey,
Yeah.
Chuck Ferrer Chuck Ferrer is calling you by name and telling his whole audience that not only are you the guy to watch on this stuff, but that he'll be having you on from time to time, and folks need to follow to get the chance to hear the great Will Teal. So yeah, I think
Chuck's a good bloke. I'm going to keep those pictures of
absolutely.
him and that goat in a safe place.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Chuck is a wonderful guy. Thanks, Lexicon.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Sure can.
Yeah, I not to change the subject, but on a lighter note, I just want to thank you and Ming for your show. I woke up late this morning, well, early this morning, around 6 o'clock. I had to come into work, or 5 in the morning Eastern time here in good old USA. I don't know. I really don't want to say that too loud. Anyways, I woke up and you guys had me in stitches. When you were talking about Miss Imperial Irenia or whatever her name was, Isabella Bova or whatever her name was, walking around England complaining that nobody spoke Russian and how terrible that was. And then you brought up the girl that talked to her mother about she can't take up prostitution because she has herpes, and she went on she went she went on the internet with that news.
I know. I can.
You
Yeah.
had me in
That
stitches this
Ming
morning. I
is
tell
really
you,
fun to work with.
it made my day. Thank you so much, you and Ming.
You're
Thank you.
very welcome. I like talking. There's everybody I like sitting with as co-host. I mean, I like to do the mix and match, right? That's why I basically have a show around the clock for everybody that I can collect the whole set because I like traveling and talking to Robin about the unique things in Ukraine. I like working with Smokey on all the military stuff because he does phenomenal research, and I can be lazy as hell. And I love working with Ming because we get to do the Vera from Long Beach Vatnik Appreciation Hour.
Yeah, that's always great. Yeah, that woman that was really amazing, and I've known Russians like that. And it's in Brooklyn too. She's been in the UK for 4 years, right? Now, 4 years is long enough to learn a second language. Excuse me, if you apply yourself. And she's bitching up a storm because she goes into the bank and they don't have anybody who can speak Russian. It was very funny anyway. And then you see a lot of that. I unfortunately haven't listened to your and Ming's deconstruction of that. I'll have to do that after I get off tonight.
Yeah, just the all the self-awareness of a dog licking its balls in the middle of the street. To think that you would film this big whiny cry thing about how you can't, your online business isn't functioning, and Wildberries commissions have gone up, and now you can't get fuel, and life's terrible. How am I going to live? I even thought of becoming a prostitute, but my mom said I can't do that because I've got herpes. I can't imagine filming that, looking at that, and going, "Yeah, that's definitely going up on the internet." I mean,
Exactly. And for all of her whining and complaining, if you look at the clothes that she's wearing and everything, she's obviously economically doing fine. So excuse me.
yeah, it's the sense of entitlement, and this is what we were talking about in relation to Russia viewing itself as a big world power, the essential, this massive importance that they've got. They really need to just recognize they're just another country that happens to be large and is sitting on a lot of resources. That doesn't make you big, and that people aren't going to move and have to kowtow to you, and you're not important. This sense of entitlement that they can go somewhere else in the world and have everybody bend to their will and their whim rather than try to fit in and assimilate. This is exactly the same problem that if these white Russians weren't white and they were Arab or Asian or whatever, if they took this attitude and said shit like that in Britain, can you imagine if that woman was an Indian or a Pakistani, and she spoke that way? Why don't these people learn Urdu for me? I mean, honestly,
Exactly.
Tommy Robinson would be all over her like a cheap suit, but because they're white, they get away with this, and they act very entitled and very superior when in fact they're just average people,
Yeah, well, and also
and
they
in many
flip.
cases not even totally average.
Yeah, exactly. And also, they flip between making insane demands because of their perceived superiority, but the minute they get pushback, then they flip over into the victimhood thing. And
Absolutely.
it's dysfunctional, let's put it that way.
Well, and it goes right to the top because the segue to the Putin has been in the news in public for the last couple of days. The first of which is he tried to make a speech to directly to Westerners. That honestly, if you listen to the thing that I put up in the nest there, or you read the transcript of it, him speaking when I was first listening to it in Russian, I thought he was speaking to his own people. I want you to hear me. The problems you're currently suffering from did not come from the outside. They are the result of the policy of your own elites over many years. How is that not Russia? How is that not speaking about yourself? But he means to be speaking to the West, all of us. Our governments have gotten in this position, and all the problems that we've created is because of our elites and what we're doing. The problem is, fella, that he doesn't actually recognize that he's talking about himself, or he should be talking about his own people. He also went to a conference of supporters for the military, and the speech, the things he's saying, Robin, are just phenomenally delusional. That thing that he said in the press conference yesterday, speaking to the West about how all our problems are the elites, and then he went to a conference on supporting the military in Russia, and he gave another one of these rambling speeches about how everybody's Russophobic. Just exactly like you said. When things get down, they blame all the bad things that they've done to themselves on, oh, it's everybody's against us. It's the world's against us. They're Russophobic, aggressive, called the collective West. Well, everybody's fighting against us. We're not fighting against Ukraine. We can't just take over Korea. We're just failing to take over Ukraine. No, no, no. We're failing to dislodge the NATO people that are there. They're fighting against NATO totally in Ukraine since the very beginning, and that's why they haven't won. But and then you got to rev up the crowd, and I love how he tries to rev up the crowd by the fact that all these supporters that he says that the public has raised more than 70 billion rubles. That's 913 million US dollars for the Russian, the people buying drones or whatever. He says they've raised $913 million. Okay, they haven't raised $913 million as yet, but even if they did, that would be dwarfed by the amount of support that's been raised from the public, including, if you're listening to me now, and you've donated anything, we have donated significantly more money to Ukraine than Russia has. But he's trying to impress his population with the numbers at this thing, and basically saying we're still going to win because now, knowing what you should know about the Russian situation, can you imagine trying to go in front of your public and say we're developing our economy, strengthening our finances? I'm going to try not to laugh. Improving our armed forces, achieving new results in the defense industries, and moving forward. Our guys, our soldiers, are advancing in all areas. Paint now, paint what he's just said there in relation to what you should know is going on the ground and inside Russia from reporting that's accurate. and it is delusional, Robin. Delusional, paints everybody as an external enemy. Everybody's against us. That's why we haven't won yet, but we are going to win because we're super beings that are managing to do everything despite what you see in front of you.
But
It's exactly at the top what that girl walking down the street in London was. The same mentality.
But the thing is, you see, there are systemic problems with the way Russia is put together, and one of them is that they have to have that external enemy to hang everything on. I mean, what would happen if tomorrow, if the Russians were to realize that NATO was not a threat, that Ukraine just wants to be left alone, and that all the problems of Russia have to do with their sclerotic system and the kleptocrats at the top of the pile. That obviously can't happen. We had Andrew Chakoy on last week, and he was talking about how this part of Russia's the way Russia is structured, it has to be at war. That war is not this is not something that they need to do, periodically, but that the Russian system, the whole Russian self definition is all of that's dependent on being in a war at all times. And once you understand that, then all of this crap about negotiations and everything go. You realize that the only way that will end this war is for Ukraine to decisively beat Russia, and that should be where we're putting all of our effort.
Agreed, and that that comes from the Soviet period of time. But this Russian, even imperial mentality back at the Tsar's times, the need and desire to find an external enemy as the means to draw your people together, because you can't draw them together by the route that we are making your life better. Things are improving across the board, the economy, everything. He can't make that case, so they have to make the case that the only reason we're being kept down, and this was the Soviets too. That this has progressed all through this Russian imperial mentality goes along whether you were a czarist or in the Politburo under Stalin or through the Russians now. This idea that they're superior and the only reason they are kept down is because the collective West is against us, right? Look, that's bullshit, because in their textbooks and all their writings, if you're listening to my voice right now, before this war in Ukraine started, did you give two shits about what was going on in Russia ever? Did you ever know anything about where you certainly weren't envious of their success? I'm sure you weren't looking at things that were produced in Russia 5 and 10 years ago and going, wow, that's so much better than here. I really envy those Russians. That's how they talk about you. Whether you're in Britain or America or Australia or whatever, they have always fomented this idea that they're better than the rest of the world, but the rest of the world collectively gets together and tries to keep them down because they're so envious of Russia's success. That since World War II, it's written in their textbooks. I can get the textbook out again if you'd like. That's their mentality, and that's one of their reasons for the war in Ukraine. That they're being kept down and kept from their traditional lands. July the 12th, yesterday, was the anniversary of the day in 2021 when Putin gave his speech about Ukraine and presaged exactly what they were going to do, what his real goals were. And it was all based on this same mentality. And it's put out there by Patrushev again. But what's going on inside Russia right now is phenomenal levels of desperation. And there are people that are putting out videos now that are saying not only the truth, not only the truth about how bad conditions are, but they are starting to make the connection that the guy at the top is the problem. What I really want to hear them all say is the guy at the top's the problem. We got to get rid of him so we can stop this war and get out of Ukraine.
But that's the problem. Really, is that the vast majority of Russians support this whole thing and can't envision their country without being at war. You've seen that. What's her name? That Margarita Simoyan. I mean, their newest thing too. I mean, it really is pretty sick too. Is to browbeat people. The people are complaining that there's no gasoline and whatever. And, well, you think it was bad now. I mean, she gave the equivalent of, I used to have to walk, 5 miles uphill
Yeah,
both ways,
bullshit. Yeah. She gave the Monty Python thing. I used to, back when I was a little
Right.
girl in 1991 in Krasnodar, the folks do a little history searching on Margarita Simonyan. Of all the things that didn't ever happen in history, I guarantee you, Margarita Simonyan carrying water for her family in 5-liter buckets uphill both ways never
Yes.
happened the most.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, none of that happens without the directives from the Kremlin. So that apparently is how they're planning on. It's the other. Beatings will continue until morale improves, kind of thing.
Well, and this imploring, and he did it at the conference again yesterday for all the supporters, the volunteer supporters. This you can take anything. The Russians are heroically resilient, and you'll knuckle down and take any sacrifice in order to win, because we are winning. That marries up exactly with what Simonyan was saying. They're trying to prepare the Russian population's mentality for the privations they are about to experience in great amount in the next year by saying that we can take anything, and it's always because the external enemy is all against us. But people don't believe that now in Russia. They don't believe it. I still talk to Russians in Russia that are not at all in support. They'd be looking for a way out, but Russia is now attempting to prevent a massive amount of exodus. Again, they've closed their border with the Baltic countries. They're having discussions with Georgia and Azerbaijan and Tajikistan, all the countries to the south of them, about getting those countries to close their border. They did get Kazakhstan to close their border, primarily to keep Russians from coming in and getting fuel, which they were doing in large amounts and starving Kazakhstan of fuel. So they're getting what they want there, but what they really want, and this approach that they're taking to now wanting to move to exit visas again. They want to trap their people in Russia, feed them a diet full of everybody's against us, and you've all got to pull together and suffer any privation because we're not willing to stop this war. But they don't say that last part. They don't say we're not. They're saying we're winning and we're driving on to victory. But nobody that I know in Russia buys that story anymore. But the key is people that are, especially people in power, need to be in a position where they no longer buy that story, and they're willing to challenge that story on the basis of the mistakes that are being made and the fact that this war makes no sense whatever, and we got to stop the war and get out of Ukraine. And if any Russians willing to say that, then they're on the path toward redemption, but not until then.
Yeah, and at this point, I don't think it's likely. I don't mean to be, I don't like to be overly negative, but I don't think Russia has any track record of making any strides in the direction of of what it would need to do to join the civilized nations of the world again.
Yeah, nor do I. I think it's incumbent upon us to point the way toward redemption, but there's no likelihood that is going to be followed by anyone, and they'll take the other path, which means uh, they'll drive to destruction of the entire Russian state, and that destruction will either happen as a direct result of this war, or it will happen as a result of the demographics problems that they've created for themselves after this war. And because one of the key points that one of the other co-hosts was asking me about in the back channel yesterday, one of the key points about whether or not you've got a successful, sustainable society is if for whatever reasons that your population can come up with, if you're producing 2.1 live births per female, your population will grow. If it's below that and you don't have mass immigration, your population is going to fall. Russia's population has been falling since the 70s, during the end of the Soviet system, and then when things looked a little bit bright in the early 90s, it picked up again, but not to 2.1. They are at 1.37 live births per female in Russia, and they're killed off 1% of their male population between 18 and 65. This is not a calculation that is leading you to anything but absolute destruction. There will literally be villages without ghost towns that'll form in regions of Russia that will no longer have people in them because the last few females will abandon those places when they can no longer support themselves there. That's literally where we're headed in remote areas of Russia. And those remote, massive swaths of open land will only, be the Chinese will move in there if they want to again, and other people. Russia will fall prey to the exact problems it's predicting, but only after its collapse, because it's not willing to recognize the reality of what they're doing now, that and find a path to saving the society. But by 2050, Russia is not even going to have population enough to cover the 9 time zones of the country anymore, and you'll see large swaths of Russia which will be open and empty, which is fine. I think we should turn it all into animal reserves after the buy it up and turn it into eco parks and nature reserves. But yeah, they're. I'm with dry fly. We were talking about this as early as 2023, end of 2023. The demographic problems that Russia has will likely lead it to collapse, even if the war ended then in 2023. We've progressed to that point. Stop talking about the demographics as the issue of urgency for Russia. The issue of urgency now is that it's close to economic collapse because of problems that it's created for itself in Ukraine, and all of the things are coming home to roost. They've now got a society that is ready to fight with one another. The Hunger Games has started over fuel. It'll happen with fuel in the next 6 months to 18 months. It'll happen with food. Food is going to be a problem next year in Russia if they don't get crops in this year and early spring next year in Russia. In a year and 3 months' time, food will become a problem in Russia if they don't make some changes. So they got societal problems that are coming to a head now. They've got diplomatic problems because the world has finally got on board with saying that Russia isn't going to win this and needs to get out of it. You've got political problems that are starting in Russia, with some of the people being willing to say the quiet parts out loud, not yet reached the epiphany, but they are starting to say the quiet parts out loud and looking after their venal self-interest. They're going to try to get out of it. And those political problems have started in Russia because of the messages they're now trying to send out, like this guy in The Economist and other things. They would not be talking about how Russia is essential and needs to be saved and not broken up. The West needs to find a way to come to a deal with Russia that saves Russia because they're somehow essential. They would not be doing that if things were not politically problematic inside Russia. They have begun fighting with themselves. If you think that there are changes afoot possibly because of the open media in Ukraine, that is going on in spades inside Russia, but it's not being reported in the media, except in very Russian the lyrical sort of language they use in novels in old time Russia about problems. They're talking in allegory about problems, but they're not making the painful points directly. But the other points, that were weak before militarily here. Ukraine, economically, they're in horrible shape, and militarily, they are suffering losses. That the people that I speak to in Russia had not yet. Russia had been successful for 7 days in preventing people knowing how bad this convoy operation has gone in the Sea of Azov, but they now know. The ones that have talked to me anyway now know, and they're now looking for information themselves. And as that propagates through Russian society, people will be saying the same thing I am. Make that make sense to me. An unescorted convoy of more than 100 ships trying to reinforce or break a blockade through an area where Russia or where Ukraine is known to have fire control. I'm looking forward to getting off today because I'm going to rush right over, listen to indications of warning, and maybe Chuck has an answer for me. Make that make sense to me. No, my Russian context, they were flabbergasted. They were like, I said, make that make sense to me. No answer.
I think part of this, Will, is that nobody is willing to contradict anybody who above them who gives them an order. So if the order comes out, you remember a couple of weeks ago there was an order that came from the Kremlin that they should that the refineries should start pumping more oil. making more gasoline. I don't know how they were supposed to
Or
do it.
build more gas stations.
Right,
That one
right.
guy said the problem is we don't have enough gas
Right,
stations.
exactly. So I mean, none of this, it's nobody is going to say who would have the nerve to say to Putin, listen, your idea about all those ships and bringing gasoline to Crimea, the Ukrainians are going to hit them all. It's not a good idea. Who, out a window with you, So this is, I mean, this is a part of Ukraine. Russia's is sowing the seeds for its own destruction in many ways, and just the way that their hierarchy is that you can't. No one at a lower level can have any idea and can pass anything up the line to try to modify what's going on.
And the only thing they're trying to do for their population to sell success is try to uh, uh, dance around gleefully for terror attacks. And the one I put up, I don't normally put Russian attacks up in the nest, but the town of Kyiv you may have heard of before, where on the it's one of the main cities on the Kyiv axis down toward Tokmak and Melitopol that we've talked. Well, the Mokryali River and all that is down where Ukraine is having success, and the town of Mala Tokmachka that Russia has never been able to take. A tiny little place, 1,500, more than 1,520 days, I think. They've laid siege to Mala Tokmachka and never been able to get through there. Ukraine's actually getting territory back down in that area. So Russia's only answer is to fly a 3-ton, that's 3,000 kilograms, 6,600 pound bomb into central Kyiv, and drop that in the center of a town. I think Kyiev's probably about 45,000 people, something like that. At this point, prior to this, relatively unscathed because Russia hasn't got there yet. They still haven't made it through Mala-Tokmachka, which is 20 or about 20 kilometers southeast, I believe. But what they can do, and they lash out like this, there's nothing of value in the center of Kyiv. I'm sure that church is going to need some new rendering on its foundations. But imagine a town near you that would be 45,000 people. Not many high rises. A little downtown with a park and a nice church, but nothing massive and fantastic. But this little town now just has the center of it essentially obliterated or damaged by Russia lobbing a 3-ton glide bomb into the center of that town. That's Russia's answer. That's success, terror, and destruction in places they'll never even take over. They'll never get here, but we're going to destroy it anyway because that's all we can do. So that's what we're going to do. The absolute bloody mindedness of Russia, it should also be pointed out to everybody. If you could show that, because it's impressive, right? If it bleeds, it leads. A big, massive shockwave, a huge bomb in the center of an otherwise unscathed town. Share that around with your folks, with people you know. Share that video and say, this is Russia's only answer to fact that they can't win anything militarily, is to lob bombs like this into towns that they can reach just because they can reach it and they want to destroy some things.
Yeah, exactly right. That and the uptick in disinformation campaigns, especially in Poland, and in other places. That's unfortunately something the Russians are able to do. And the worst, you can always tell when things are getting worse and worse on the front lines, that you start seeing all sorts of placement of ridiculous false stories all over the place. There was one where they were blaming Ukraine for the heat-related deaths in France. How you can blame that on Ukraine, I don't know, but they were trying, and we're seeing quite an uptick in this stuff in the last few weeks.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, the disinformation, the oligarchs that are getting Economist articles, the bizarre rants that you'll see from Putin toward the Western folks. They're doing all that they can from their old KGB playbook, including ramping up, getting Americans to fight with Americans over things and Canadians to fight with over things with Canadians. You know, they're ramping up all of the things that they're the only things they're good at, because things are going very badly for them in the campaign. As I've mentioned before, they can talk up all they want about how they've taken Kostiantynivka, which they haven't, by the way, and they're not going to do that imminently. I think Smokey said maybe the first. I think we agreed maybe the 1st of September. They will have essentially taken over Kostiantynivka, which is down in a bowl underneath fire control of people like our friends from the 18th National Guard at Chasiv Yar that still hold territory there. The Kostiantynivka is going to be no big win for Russia, but they're trying to sell it as a big win because that's the only place they're even creeping forward at. Huliopoli to the west has stopped, and they're not able to make it to the fortress belt there or cross it. Terrain's terrible for them to move there. They don't have any Starlink capability for land drones for more than 3 months, and the only places they can creep forward are Kostiantynivka. Activity on most of the other axes has dropped to virtually nothing, except for uh, uh, Pokrovsk, Kostiantynivka, and their attempts to move in Huliopoli. But even Huliopoli has basically stopped. And because Russia is pushing down from the north and has liberated Ternova, Zaporizhzhia, Novoheralivka, Verona, Sichneva, and Malakivka in the north. These 3 assault brigades that have taken to the north of Huliopoli are pushing down on them and pushing toward their supply lines that they're using to feed their offensive in Huliopoli. Even their bombing campaign to suppress Ukrainian units to the west of Huliopoli so they could advance, that has slowed down drastically to almost nothing because they need those bombs now to try to keep the Ukrainians off of them in the north. Their supplies are so demonstrably diminished that if they don't have glide bombing of the advancing Ukrainians that aren't advancing, greatly and rapidly, but they are advancing, and they're advancing in holding positions, which is putting Russia under threat to the north of Huliopoli. And so they need to move their, like Chuck has always said, you can tell where Russia's either going or worried about based on where the bombing intensity is. And the bombing intensity has shifted from the west of Huliopoli because Russia knows they're not moving forward there. That isn't going to happen this summer. They're going to focus on the smaller number of axes north of Pokrovsk to try to get to Dobrapilya and into Kostiantynivka, and try to keep the Ukrainian advances on them off of them by bombing them as much as they can, and expect this to continue because once the once Ukrainians are able to make an advance, they make an advance and hold it. The Russians hate this. The reporters are that Ukraine is making advances into the areas like the places I just mentioned, Makivka, and, and they show up fresh because the Ukrainian troops that advance, the assault troops that advance, only have to carry their rifle and a few magazines with them and some water, because as soon as they move in and occupy a position, they start fortifying it, and Ukrainian drones then drop them heavy machine guns and all the rest of the equipment they need. Russia is crying about the fact that Ukraine is moving in, so that when Russia goes back and tries to do the infiltration tactics they use in those areas, they've had to carry everything on their backs for 15 kilometers, and they show up tired and incapable to fight with low ammunition, no water, no food, and they're now trying to take on well supplied, fit, ready to fight Ukrainians that have heavy weapons with them. Not a winning combination for Russia. And as long as Ukraine can keep starving them of supply, it won't matter how many extra bodies they send into it. Russia, based on the casualty rates and the activity rates, is doing their mass push with what they've got now before the September elections. And if, as and when this fails, and it will, Russia will call a major mobilization as their last ditch attempt to try to get something after September, I reckon. Robin?
Yeah, I know this. It's funny. This election. Is there any question about who's going to win it? It's sort of funny that that election will make a difference in Russia altogether.
It is. Sitting in the third person perspective, it's difficult to understand. I've questioned multiple people about this. Why wait till the elections? Why bother waiting? Because you know who's going to win. Well, as soon as as soon as Putin and Kirienko get the candidate list done, then you know who's going to win the elections. Why bother about the elections? Why bother about the elections is this: the elections don't matter at all. But Putin puts big stock in the fact that he has broad, massive public support with his any of the surveys that they do, any of the polling that they do. Putin's always had this mass of, people are always behind him. And those also don't make much difference because who's going to lie to an authoritarian pollster? Uh, don't know, but it's this facade of respectability. And if Putin loses hold of the facade of respectability, and another, let's say Belousov, the Minister of Defense, is able to raise his public profile, that's when you see political change take place in Russia. When another challenger to the throne can show that he's got political support, and so they are likely waiting till the elections are finished in September, only so that Putin can try to drive turnout to those elections, which are a fait accompli. But if he can generate a large turnout of people going to vote the way he wants, because the candidates are all already selected, then uh, it'll add to his veneer of power and stability, and that I think is. But after he's got those state Duma reps in office to do his bidding on whatever decrees he wants, I think that they will either have no choice at that point than try to sue for peace, which I don't think they're going to do, or call a mobilization and let the Hawks give the Hawks their way, uh, declare war, fully mobilize the economy, do a major mobilization of people, close the borders, keep everybody inside, and put maximum, what they call maximum effort into the winning the war, because that's the problem. The problem is not that they've made a mistake and they're doing the wrong thing. It's just they haven't been trying hard enough. And I think that mentality is going to win out in Russia, and they are going to sacrifice another 500,000 people to try to push and win. But the
You know,
key is they'll be going, those 500,000 additional meat bags will be arriving at the deadliest front line in the history of warfare, and they will already be undersupplied with everything they need to fight. And that's the grinder that they're going to be fed into, Robin.
yeah, and I think part of also, and I was thinking as you were talking about the elections, one thing that Snyder points out in The Road to Unfreedom is that elections in these kind of autocracies, everyone knows it's rigged. People go to vote knowing that their vote, doesn't make any difference really, but it's a very important public display of subjugation that by going to vote in an election that you know damn well is rigged, and everyone knows it's rigged, but you go to the polls and it's performance art, and you subjugate yourself to the the government, to Putin and his henchmen, by playing along with this farce, even though everyone knows it's a farce. So this may be part of it too. When the elections happen, it will be, people will have abased themselves by going to vote, really, and this may make them more malleable afterwards, so that may be part of it too.
Yeah, I mean that's it, right? The veneer of respectability, the veneer of I've got the massive public support, so don't be left out, be on board, and certainly no other challenger should try to take me on because I've got mass public support. And look at all my new fresh people that are in the Duma that I've selected to put in there because they're hawks and they're going to be hard. They're going to make emphatic speeches in support of what we want to do already, which is, you know, go all in. I think Russia will. Putin, his entire history is escalate, escalate, escalate. He's never backed down. He's only been beaten, and being beaten in the first Chechen war was only a reason for him to skulk away and find a way to put maximum effort and escalate next time. And the second Chechen war was far worse. He doesn't have a let's change our thinking and come to an agreement mentality at all. He's going to it'll be maximum effort, and it's if you care about Russian citizens at all, they should be notified that this is what's happening. This is what we see coming, because I don't. If Russia wants to send another 500,000 people to die in Ukraine, that's their decision. But I wouldn't advise any of the people that I know to be one of those 500,000 people, because it is destined for failure. It is absolutely destined for failure. Until Russia can show that they have solved the problem of Ukraine's capability to interdict all of their supply lines in the medium range, if they haven't solved that problem, feeding more meat into that system is going to be a hindrance rather than a help.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the one other thing I wanted to we're actually past the end of this, but the one other thing I wanted to discuss just for a minute, Will, is what's been going on in Poland in the last month or so, because in part because it reflects so much on what's been going on, about the Russian disinformation. There have been, unfortunately, I mean, really horrifically, there have been some attacks on Ukrainians in Poland in the last few weeks. Several young girls who were yelled at by.
So I didn't put that video of those
No,
girls
he didn't
on the
need to.
bus there, but the first thing, and I didn't put it up because I don't want to popularize that, the video that's negative. But I want to comment on is that's probably a 14 or 15-year-old girl, maybe something like that. Her composure and her unwillingness to, her actual, composure and her standing up, standing her ground against that 54-year-old absolute piece of shit bus driver who was on a bus driving home or taking a free ride home, whatever, and decided to abuse verbally these two young girls from who happened to be Ukrainian over their Ukrainianness and what are you doing in my country and all that sort of stuff. That was horrendous. But the first thing I noticed about that video was that the look on that girl's face, it was shock, but there was no fear there.
That's absolutely right, and that has been something you've seen through a number of these videos, and one of the things they pointed out too is several times some of these thugs, they're these brown shirt types that unfortunately are been given a bit of free reign at this point. Very often, like this, there was a woman that they banged on the door of her business to demand whether she supported Bandera or not, and one of the things that Poles pointed out was that she spoke better Polish than these thugs that had come to harass her, which was sort of interesting. But I wanted to bring this up for go ahead, Will.
Well, and I'll just note that the man in that video against those girls was quickly identified and has been arrested by the Polish authorities, because
that's exactly
while
right.
there may be this popular, what call them MAGA, this tiny percentage of people who are ignorant thugs, that view is not shared broadly across the hierarchy of Polish society.
That's exactly right. And we have seen every one of these incidents that I can think of, there has been a post relatively shortly thereafter that the Polish police or whatever law enforcement has arrested this person and is dealing with them. The thing is, though, and it's getting better. I see. The problem is there are a lot of good Poles. There are a lot of Poles who support Ukraine. But they have been I don't know whether cowed into silence or what, but they're not making the noise. And we see this in the United States too. We see, people like, you remember Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had very little constituency, but she had an incredibly big mouth. And these people make a bigger splash than the amount of support they have. It is nice to see. Radek Sikorski has been very totally steadfast in pointing out how wrong this is, and a number of other prominent polls.
The
Uh,
defense minister in particular has
yes,
been excellent.
Kamish, what is his name? I can never. How these Polish names.
But
Anyway, yes, the defense
clear,
minister.
distinct statements like he made. I would rather see Polish air defense missiles taking down missiles over Kyiv than I would over Warsaw.
Right, exactly, and that I think that's getting some traction in Polish society, because no matter they're ginning up hatred that really wasn't there anymore, really, because they had to go back into history almost 80 years to come up with something, and it's not getting the resonance that I think the Russians certainly hoped. And Novorotsky, who is doing this for crass political purposes, he's trying to undermine Tusk particularly, and it hasn't worked.
But they're
You know.
smart. I mean,
Oh
the
yeah.
responses when you heard Marjorie Taylor Greene in America, or these, the MAGA idiots say something, I'm always hoping somebody comes out and says some of the things like, Tusk says regularly, and the other ministers have said things. But the best one I heard yesterday was a commentator saying that uh, if anybody asks you to vote about something that happened 70 years ago, you're a damn fool.
Yeah, very nice. And the frustrating thing about all of this, and with this I will end, because I could get riled up about this. There have been at least 10 different agreements to work together, and statements made by Ukraine or joint Ukrainian Polish delegations surrounding all of this stuff. It's not like nothing's ever happened. Novorotsky tries to make it sound as though that Ukrainians are, they did all these terrible things to Poles. Poles had never did anything wrong, and these nasty Ukrainians won't even admit there was a problem, which they have talked about this in the last 35 years. There's a group at the Ukrainian Catholic University that works with both Polish and Ukrainian historians, particularly on the Volyn massacre, and documenting the actual names of people and everything. This has all been going on, but for crass political reasons, Navratsky has brought this up again, I think, and I don't know whether he's on the payroll of the Russians or not, but he certainly is playing into their playbook. Fortunately, I hope, I'm far away to be able to know this for sure, but it certainly sounds to me, just from what I'm hearing, that more and more Poles are getting fed up with this. I hope so, and I hope to God he gets voted out the next time, because I'd be very happy to see him off the stage.
Yeah, me too. Any of these, well, just generally across the board, these populists who always end up on the simple answers to complex problems. Whether it was Trump and MAGA, that it's all these immigrants, or the Polish people focusing on problems, but historical 70, 80-year-old problems between Poland and Ukraine, and failing to recognize that the guys next door, Russia, have done far more damage to both those countries, and are at the heart of this problem now. All these populists, Orban came to power as a populist at first, but there aren't simple answers to complex problems. So if that idiot here in One Nation tries to tell you there are simple answers to Australia's productivity problems, and it's all caused by immigrants that are coming and taking your jobs. Around the world, Russia and China are fomenting this discord between our own population because they have had access to and hold on the social media platforms, and we haven't been participating. We have until NAFO came about, they had free reign to sow discord. And that's why they hate NAFO so much. That's why Russia's banded us a terrorist organization, a hacker organization, because we're fighting their disinformation. Finally. But think back to the time when Brexit was going on, before we knew about all the nefarious activity of Cambridge Analytica that then Bannon helped move to America to do the MAGA thing. These folks, these populists, are populists that are fomenting dissent amongst people who are in the same constituency. Are times tough in America, cost of living wise, Australia, Britain, everywhere? They are. But the people they're pointing out as being the problems in relation, the root cause of those things, those aren't the problems. It's that classic case of rich oligarchs everywhere taking out of a dozen cookies that are available, two regular people, a union person and a management person, a middle management person sitting down at a table with an oligarch who owns the company they both work for, and splitting up a dozen cookies. He takes 11 and looks at the union guy and said, "That guy's after your cookie." This is what's happening everywhere because they've had access to the means of first mainstream media that they all complained about was liberal, and then the oligarchs all bought that up, and now that's all swayed toward against the common people that ought to be stuck together. And the social media landscape has been dominated and used by China and Russia because they don't care what the fight's over. They just want the fight to happen. And they've been causing that all over the world. So beware a populist if they're picking up on things that divide you rather than things that unite you. Populism can be a good way to build a coalition and win an election in, say, an area where, well, like South Carolina now, that's been dominated by one politician for a long time. A populist there who had the goodwill of all the or the good fortunes of all the people in South Carolina, that actually at their heart of it in economic and other terms. But if it's a populist that shows up and goes, you know what the problem is here? We gave women the vote. You're always on a loser. If any populist that tries to divide rather than consolidate people is almost always influenced by very bad people and funded by very bad people. I'm looking right at you, Nigel Farage, right? Look at it, always comes out. There's always, it's like I said, it's not the 6 degrees of separation to Kevin Bacon. Every one of these bad, nefarious things that happens in the world right now, at one arm's length away, there's always a Russian, it seems. Coincidence,
Yep.
Robin?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, and it's funny that when we had Roman Sheremeta on a few days ago, and he kept on saying, I don't want to say I don't really buy into conspiracy theories, but, and this is the problem now. It's not a conspiracy theory if it's an actual fact, and it's very hard these days to find a good, honest conspiracy theory to believe in because so often, it's if the Russia, well, it turns out that Russia has its fingers in everything at this point. If it's something bad happening in the world, the chances are very good that Russia had something to do with it.
Well, and it's like like that old religious proverb: the worst thing the devil ever did was make you convinced that he doesn't exist. The that look at evidence. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but it's completely okay to build up factual evidence that shows that Russia is involved in bad things everywhere. Like I went through in my rant the other day. Even the Epstein case is a perverted pedophile who started out as a rich perverted pedophile, but very quickly became a Russian information honeypot and influence operation, and was expanded greatly with their support. And the evidentiary record shows that. The Russia today, influencers all through America who are now sitting in the White House press pool rather than get it prosecuted and run out of the country or put in jail for being unregistered foreign agents. Those people are let off the hook. Don't You don't need to build a conspiracy theory. You just need to follow the actual evidence and money trail typically, and it almost always shows, like in the case of Nigel Farage, that there are many sources of nefarious Russian money that are getting in there. Look at the CPAC arrangement with Hungary. You think Hungary came up with that money themselves? No, they were given it by Russia to funnel that money into CPAC so that they could influence the American political system. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's demonstrated fact that Russia is doing things. Now, I try to tamp down conspiracy theories like I did 2 days ago when Lindsey Graham died, and tried to say the simple answer here, man, that blew up incredibly because I wasn't immediately accepting of a conspiracy theory related to his death. And, that's the problem. Don't let and Russia got involved in heavily trying to build the conspiracy theory around Lindsey Graham's death, specifically because it muddies the water, right? It's not evidentiary based. I'm all for an autopsy and a simple investigation of that, but I'm certainly not going to jump to conclusions about Russia or anyone else being involved in his death until there's evidence to show it. But in the Epstein case, in the CPAC case, in the Brexit case, in the American interference in the 2016 election case, all of this stuff is demonstrably proven heavily with lots and lots of evidence. And to then ignore those things just because it's Russia every time. Trump claimed Russia. Tell me that the major buyers of all of Trump's properties, the people who got involved in bailing him out of his bankruptcy at Deutsche Bank, all of the people that bought his houses and property from him, and then for 20 times the value that they sold just years before, tell me that those Russia folks aren't up to shitty activity in relation to Donald Trump. It's just fact. The world has a Russia problem, and that's why I desperately want to see Russia defeated in this war and have to be wound back inside its country so that it in an attempt to even survive as a country, because the tentacles of Russia being removed from all of our political systems and from Central Africa to further line its pockets with wealth that ought to be going to the countries that are in Central Africa. The elimination of the Russian problem in the world is going to be a very good thing for all of us. As and when Ukraine carries on and eliminates the Russian problem here in what they call, and I call, the last war. This is the last time Ukraine is going to fight Russia. The last time.
Yeah, pardon the expression, from your lips to God's ears. I think that the Ukrainians are very clear about that. They've been through this way too often with the Russians, and it's like, appeasing the crocodile so it'll eat you last. If Russia is in a position to be able to do this again, they will. So I think Ukraine is very clear about that. I think the Europeans are beginning to understand that more. But hopefully, they will be able to finish this in a way that will make this the last war.
And don't allow Russia to turn that into their dictumhood, where they say, "Oh, Ukrainians are calling this the last war. That means they want to invade or genocide Russia." No, that's not. That's not what any of the Ukrainians have talked to me about. But that term, the last war, that has been coming out of Ukraine through various channels, this is the last time we're going to fight Russia. We're going to let Russia have the capacity to do this to us again. If that happens to generate the situation where Russia collapses, so be it. We're not worried about that. But the purpose here is just to make sure Russia never has the capacity to threaten Ukraine again like this. And they are adamant, and I am with them, that they should pursue this to the end.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not only Ukraine is fighting for Ukraine, but this will take care of future threats to the Baltics or Poland or Germany or any place else too.
Yeah, and that's why Ukraine's going to pursue this, regardless of what whoever says what. Nobody's going to be able to stop them from carrying on this war until they have all of their 1991 territories back, and Russia no longer has the capacity to ever threaten them again like this. And anybody who tries to stop Ukraine from doing that is going to be a problem. And they are going to because not only are they removing that capacity from Russia for their own benefit, but it's also going to benefit all of the Baltic states and the Nordic states. And the people who seem to be quite on board with that are the people who know Russia well, the Baltic states and the Nordic states, and even people like Aliyev in what was gave a news conference yesterday. President Aliyev has said in Tajikistan, who has also stood up to Russia. He said he's never agreed to an occupation. He fully, even though they're trying to maintain friendly relationships with Russia, he has said that he fully believes that Ukraine should never accept any occupation, and he's fully for the restoration of all their 1991 territories, openly and directly. And remember, this is the guy whose plane was shot down and got concessions out of Russia and reparations, because he got them to admit they did it on Christmas Day 2 years ago, and he got them to pay reparations for it because he knows that there are lines. You can try to get along with Russia, but if you accept any of these imperialistic things that it's doing, you're next. And he knows that they share a border. So everybody who's got clear eyes about Russia is on board with what Ukraine's total goal here is. It isn't occupation and takeover of Russia. It is elimination of the threat of Russia.
Yeah, precisely. And it's when we see some of these smaller countries surrounding Russia starting to stand up to them, it's a good sign, because I think that more and more people are seeing that Russia is in a state that it is not. It's not in a situation where it can be such a big threat to many of these other surrounding countries, that they've got their hands more than full at this point.
Indeed. I feel like I'm Alan Brewer. We've run a half hour over already.
Yes, you and Alan, you're both wonderful. Yes, we have gone a bit over though, and I'm beginning to fall asleep here at my desk. So, well, fortunately for Will, it's morning where he is, but it's getting pretty late here. Anyway, do we have anything else we want to talk before we start shutting down?
No, just want to remind everybody that thanks for coming for the conversation, but we're also here, of course, to try to help people steer toward supporting Ukraine through donations to any of the fundraisers that we help platform, whether it's the medics. I know April Huggett got caught in the rain the other day, and after complaining about the heat for several days, now she was complaining about being cold and wet. These women, they're never happy, Robin. No, she's doing it. She's
Yeah,
doing a
listen,
great
you.
thing. She's doing
Will
a great.
says that confident that he's halfway around the world, and
I,
I can't get at
I
him.
know, I know, I know. So, but she is walking all the way from Kyiv to back to Kramatorsk, where her unit is stationed, and she's trying to raise money on the way. So help her out, or Rebecca Makiowski, the other medic we support. Uh, uh, the folks from Vanguard that are trying to raise money now for their next trip with Terexis and the guys into deliver medical supplies. The humanitarian support work that's done by the Basilian Sisters is worthy of your support, as are all the trigger pullers that we support, like War Doggo's a proactive one for the SBU guys and 18th National Guard. Woodruff's team at Frontline Kit, who is sending an immense amount of these drones to do these mid-range strikes now. So if you want your money to go to the trigger pullers where rubber meets the road most directly, these a massive amount of drones that the production capacity that they are building at Frontline Kit is a good thing to see. because they're very high quality drones, and they're taking out trucks all the way to Mariupol and Taganrog. So help those guys out if you can. Ivan and his daughter Alexandra are expanding and trying to continue to expand the capabilities of people to shoot down drones with shotguns, and they're worthy of support. As are either of the any of the writers like Svet Danam, Gloria Mindock, or Oleg Varetsky, who have books for sale and are donating their proceeds to other causes here at Volya. So help out any of those. Help out One You Find Yourself, United 24, the Wild Hornets, any of the folks that you know are reputable, and keep the support up to the folks in Ukraine, because they know. And the other thing is, when you leave a donation, leave a message for the folks you're supporting, because they get those messages, especially if, on the Give Butter site that War Doggo uses, that Rebecca's used, that April now uses, the people that you can provide even a $5 donation to, and you send them a message of support, to your understanding of the condition they're in, and you knowing that if they know that you know about their situation, it makes so much difference to them. Andre in Besanov, who we've spoken to, has said this to me directly, that just knowing that you guys are there every day and still support us makes so much difference to the mentality, the morale of the folks that are in the field. That always leave them a message. It's a big part of your donation, but do leave a donation for any of the fundraisers if you can, Robin.
Yeah, that's what I think. This is important what you're saying, Will. And and even if you have only $5, the fact that you take the time to donate, and ideally leave a message, even if you can't, but ideally leave a message. It goes a lot farther than $5, because you're saying to Ukrainians on the front lines that, as Will is saying, that we haven't forgotten about them, that we still support them, and that makes a big difference. The thing to remember too is that Ukraine is doing well now, but we are not, the war is not over by a long shot. And one of the ways that we get the war over faster is by doing as much as we can to adequately fund all of the work that's done by. I mean, we have an incredible group of fundraisers here. Any one of them is, I personally, highly recommend. They're reputable people. They're people who use the money very carefully. They use the money it goes a lot farther with them than it does with a lot of other charities. And you really do make a difference. I mean, Andre has told us that some of the things that he's working on, because of our donations, and I would say also for the shotgun fundraiser, we have given people the tools that have actually saved lives. It's not just theoretical, that have actually saved Ukrainian lives. That's an incredible privilege. So if you're able to help, please keep that in mind. Thanks so much.
Yep, and the big board's building as we speak, folks. 3 more vessels went on the tally from the USF.
Really?
Up to 114 while we've been talking this morning. So well done, fellas. Keep it up.
They run out of ships. I mean, how long can they keep this up? It's amazing. Well, anyway, so thank you, everybody, and I would say to all of our Ukrainian friends and those wonderful guys taking care of all those ships, Slava Ukraini.
Herom Slava.
And before I go on, Will, is there anything else you wanted to add before I shut us down?
Nope. Do peremohi.
Do peremocha, slava Nazi, smert voraham, and skoro pobachimos. Thanks, Will. Good night.
Pobachimus.
Thank you for joining us on the radio. We look forward to seeing you again. Your audience. Your audience.